I think probably 2 years ago, this room would be much smaller. So I think that shows us that this has become quite an interesting and important topic as of late. Today we have an abundance book on the bestseller list. We have a YIMBY caucus in Congress, and a city CIO can stand up an LLM prototype in a week. So something has been unstuck. So today we're going to hear from 3 people working on regulatory reform from 3 different angles. We have Santi from Inside Government, who is really developing and implementing tools to drive reform and progress. We have Zach Liskow from the legal academic side, diagnosing the problem and shedding insight on promising approaches. And then we have Christine Sang from the product development side, taking what she's learned inside Stanford's regulatory lab and building a company focused on developing tools based on the latest research that can be used in practice. So today, our goals are that you leave with, 1, a clear picture of what's actually possible right now, but also an honest map of the obstacles and barriers still to navigate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. So our structure is our panelists are going to do some brief intros about their work. We'll do a round of questions, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so Santiago, I will turn to you to start.
Sure. So thank you again for having me. I'm Santi Garces. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of Boston. And I have the pleasure and honor of working with a really talented team to try to make government make a little bit more sense for the people that need to, whether they like it or not, have to deal with us when they're trying to go about their lives. In the context of regulatory reform, so what initially had started as a technology project, so we are, like every so often we need to go and make upgrades to our systems. We had made a request to go and start modernizing our permitting system, and our mayor, Michelle Wu, started to push us on saying, if you're going to make an investment like this, you have to make a change that means something to the people that we serve. And I was like, I don't know what that means. So we started to try to think and then engage with community members. We did some surveys, some focus groups, what does the permitting process, and we knew from some survey work that the permitting experience in Boston was one of the most deficient experiences. Only about 37% of people expressed satisfaction with the process. That was below the benchmark, which is pretty low, is usually not very high in most cities, but Boston was worse than our benchmark. So we started to ask some follow-up questions, and what the themes that started to come up is there's the permitting experience feels like an insider experience. When you know, and if you've been doing a lot of big, complicated projects, you kind of know how to navigate around them. You know who to talk to, what office you need to go to. But for most people, when they're navigating the process, they've only done it a couple of times in their life. They haven't done it in a long time. And we usually don't. What we realize is we hadn't told people what they're supposed to do. We would tell you why solar panels are critical to fighting climate change, that you could get tax credits, but we wouldn't tell you what you actually need to do for us to let you put them on your roof, which, we play a key role in not letting people put things on the roof. So we started to think about how do we build this ontology and this experience-based permitting experience, and we've been, I don't want to steal the thunder, but anyways, we've been working a lot on both challenging the regulation, but also more broadly making the regulation make sense to people based on the experience that we know, how they think about the way that they experience the permitting process. And it's early, but we feel that is a promising thread. Is we have regulations for good reason. Sometimes we should challenge and question why we have them the way that that we're regulating things the way that we do. But ultimately, we want people to be able to get the things that they are trying to get done. And we can reorganize that information and those systems to make it work a little bit better for people.
Great. Hi, I'm Zach Lisko. I'm a professor at Yale Law School. I'm a lawyer and I'm an economist. I previously was the chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget at the White House in the previous administration. And most of what I work on now is why it's so hard for the US to build, in particular infrastructure, why we're so slow and why we are so expensive. I started thinking about these things over a decade ago when I was living in California, and California high-speed rail was not going well. It's now going even worse. The costs have gone up, and I don't even think it's fair to talk about a timeline because the thing might never be finished. And it struck me that there was a sense that something was not working, but there really was almost no academic research on it. So I started studying, to my surprise, the highways, the interstate highways. I used to want to study highways because we spent a huge amount of money on them. We spent $500 billion. We built them over many decades. I wanted to see, did things used to be different here in the US? And the answer was yes, by a huge amount. What we found was that the cost to build a mile of interstate highway, adjusting for price changes over time, cost 3 times as much in the 1980s than the 1960s. What that suggests is that something changed, something big, probably legal, something having to do with policy change in our society between the 1960s and the 1980s that meant that $1 went 1/3 as far in the 1980s versus the 1960s. And I spent the many years after that exploring the bureaucratic issues, the regulatory issues, the legal issues that underlie that. I think there's no one cause, and the cause varies depending upon where you're looking. But I think that there's a huge amount to explore here, both academically, but also in terms of policy, to make government work better and to be able to build better.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Great to see you all. I'm Christine Sang. I'm the CEO of Caldera. We're a public benefit corporation working on AI for state and local. And before this, I was the founding executive director of Stanford Reg Lab, which partners with government agencies to build and deploy AI through a partnership model. And I would say, for years, I would have said that my dream job was to take over the California DMV because I really thought that I could help fix it. Whether or not that's true is one matter, but, what I really have always been motivated by is how do we take some of the lessons from the private sector? I spent a number of years in early and growth stage startups, and so I saw up close what technology could do and how it was really missing from a lot of the areas that were most critical. And so that's how I ended up at Stanford, and how we built up a lab that was really focused on prototyping and showing and demonstrating what frontier technologies could do for the public sector.
Thanks so much. So Christine, I view Stanford Reg Lab as one of the most innovative and practical university-based centers.
Thank you.
But talk a little bit more about your move from Stanford Reg Lab to launching your own PBC and why you're motivated to do that.
Yeah, so just by way of context, Stanford Reg Lab has really focused on a process where we start with partners. So we work with amazing government and public service leaders who really are thinking about core challenges of governance. And then we think together, how can technology or other methods help solve this? Sometimes that's data science, sometimes that's AI, sometimes that's not. And we worked across a number of areas from environmental governance to health equity to benefits administration, the whole range of things. If you've heard of some of our work, it might be that, we helped the IRS document that Black Americans were being audited at 3 to 5 times the rate of other Americans. And more recently, we worked with the city of San Francisco to crawl over the municipal code to look for sources of burden, whether that was commissions, fees, various decision-making structures that might slow down a process. And that resulted in the city attorney of San Francisco introducing a bill to cut or consolidate 1/3 of all mandatory reports. The idea is that, within bureaucracy, when there's a political compromise, often someone will just throw in a report. But, sometimes that will take, hundreds of staff hours of time, and maybe no one is reading it. So the idea was, how can we ease the burden on public servants and really think about how they can use their time in the best way? And so, I'm very sorry, just back to the question. I'm very proud of the work that we did at Stanford. And I think it's really been, really useful to show what AI can actually do concretely and deployed in the public sector. But there's this thing that maybe some of you all have heard of called AI. And, basically a few years ago, it decided to get off the, public bus and get onto like a F1 race car. And so suddenly what was possible just fundamentally changed. And so, what was, kind of smaller, kind of like very tailored proofs of concept came like a model that was capable of actual like reasoning. And so we built models that in evaluations, in randomized trials, actually matched human performance, and was able to save, like tens of thousands of staff hours and millions of dollars. But the tricky thing about an academic environment is that the focus is on, what is the frontier, which is a really critical place to be, right? How do we push forward the entire ecosystem of tech for good? But there's really no room to kind of scale, and it's really not a vehicle to achieve scale. And so basically the star data scientist from RegLab and I decided to leave and basically start a public benefit corporation that was really trying to focus on what we thought of as that missing gap, like the actual place to go from a scientific development and a proof of concept that is evaluated to actually scale.
And why a PBC specifically?
Yeah, so a public benefit corporation is essentially a C Corp that can have essentially a public good mission. So you don't have to optimize for shareholder value. Classic ones are Nava, if you've heard of that in the public benefit space, and Patagonia, things like that. And so we decided to choose this structure because we thought that it was important to be able to basically bring together both public good as well as funding from private markets, because government technology is really, really difficult, and we think that you need to have a major engine to actually achieve scale.
Thank you so much. So, Zach, you are working, you have this incredible research agenda that's really identifying and documenting the cost to build in the US. What are some of the drivers that you've identified for those costs?
Yeah, so high level, I would identify two. Those are lots of procedures and too weak personnel, so procedures and personnel. And I'm working on each of them. So in terms of procedures, if you compare the US to foreign countries where it costs to build transit 1/3 as much as it does in the US, there just are many, many fewer rules that governments need to go through in order to put pavement on the road or put rail on the ground. This comes from many different angles. Partly it's environmental review, which is much, much more litigious and it takes more time and gives small minorities veto rights that drive up costs in a way that is just not the case in Europe, which is plenty democratic and has a pretty good environment. Other types of procedures are on procurement. So when the US is building public infrastructure, as is typically the case anywhere in the world, it's the government planning it, it's the government putting out bidding procedures, and it's the government choosing what gets built and who builds it, but it's a private contractor building it. And that's a pretty complex thing to do. And the way we do it in the US is very different from how it's done abroad. Abroad, it tends to be the case that you have expert civil servants who have discretion to choose the best type of contractor who's going to do the best job. In the US, it's the opposite. We have 1,000 rules that civil servants need to follow, even if it results in an absurd outcome, like choosing a bidder who in the past has gone way over budget, way over time. If that person happens to put in the lowest bid, you often have to choose that person, which is, even the people who are implementing it think it is absurd. So that's the kind of thing that we have, just many, many of these kinds of rules that drive up costs and lengthen timelines. So that's the procedure side. Then there's the personnel side. Again, you can look at the contrast with Europe. So it was a surprise to me to learn that when you're looking at trains and who builds most effectively, the Italians are the kind of the good example out there. So I think we don't normally think of the Italians as having, being a particularly well-run place. Italy's being a particularly well-run place. Turns out, though, with respect to building transit, they are. And why are they? It's because they have a well-staffed expert bureaucracy with well-paid individuals, enough of them to manage these complex projects. In the U.S., it's typically the opposite. We have too few people who are paid too little to attract and retain the best folks. So I've done research with the California Department of Transportation, looked at their highways, and what we found was very striking. We found that if you go from a low quality to a high quality highway engineer, so these are people managing these complex projects built by the private sector, the savings are so large if you go to the higher quality engineer manager that those savings equal 3 times what it costs to pay for an entire engineer. So it seems like it's really, really worth paying for quality if you want to actually lower costs. And not paying for quality, it's probably penny wise, pound foolish, because you could probably increase quality quite a bit and bring down costs a lot. Similarly, we looked at retirements. We found that when these folks retire, and they're often middle-aged, because they can go to the private sector and earn 2 or 3 times as much as they earn in the public sector. What happens is that California loses expertise, and project costs go up a lot. They go up by so much that the costs increase 6 times what these engineers are making in the first place. So it seems like it's really, really worth paying some money to retain these people so that you can do a good job managing these complex projects. It's complicated to build infrastructure, and government is ineluctably involved, even if you outsource the actual building of it. We need enough people, and we need enough paid people to do it. There's also an interaction between these two. Because it's so complex, there are so many procedures, you need more people inside of government and more trained people inside of government to actually navigate these complex procedures, which can take many people inside of government many, many years to master, let alone those on the outside. So these two aspects, procedure and personnel, interact with each other as well.
Thank you. So Santi, I want to turn over to the solution side of things. You've been incredibly productive in your time as CIO. What are some of the initiatives that you think have had the most impact?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting reflection about why we have had impact, but maybe that's a different question. I think, again, we have embraced an approach that is one where we embrace the fact that we don't know everything, and where we try to, I talk about like the 3 E's. Expertise comes from experience, and experience comes from experimentation. Like in almost any setting, like you just don't know unless you're trying to do things. To some extent, like even if you're going to end up with the determination that it'd be better to outsource, you don't know what you should be buying, how you should be buying it, and what it should do if you don't have a little bit of an understanding of that texture. So some things that we have done is like implementing AI search on boston.gov. Again, it started with this notion that AI, like extracting embeddings to represent language in this like vectorial way can help people find things that they are looking for that they wouldn't even know what's the right way to find that. Just like kind of understanding how like the underlying math of this works, and we gave it a try. So we said we're gonna try it in 1 page. We made some mistakes. So like we thought that like restricting the body of work that it was referencing would improve accuracy, but it actually decreases accuracy because we are a mess. So we have relevant information in other parts of the website. So it like expand the scope of what was being referenced. And then we launched it in the top 50 pages in boston.gov. And we started evaluating unit costs, like how much did AI search cost versus the traditional search, and performance, which in this case we looked at self-reported customer satisfaction. So we asked people, thumbs up, thumbs down, did you find the thing that you're looking for? And the traditional search performed abysmally. So only 1 out of 10 people said that they could find what they're looking for. Most people are probably just going through Google outside of the search on the website. With AI search, we were able to get it up to 40% satisfaction, just with the technology. So we realized that cost is roughly the same. So again, in about like 6 months, and it's partially because like we've invested in a great team. We have a product team, we have engineering within our environment that we're able to go deploy this, test, evaluate, and then by the time that we were having to renew our search, we were like, why would we renew? It costs us roughly the same. It's 4 times better. AI search is the only search on boston.gov. And now we continue to iterate around like some other things. Some people really hate AI, so we're like, maybe we let people choose whether they have a summary or not. And we've learned other things, like for instance, like a lot of internal staff were using search on boston.gov to retrieve information from a knowledge management. So those people actually were really good about finding, they knew what were the keywords that got them the things that they were looking for, but we're like, we're not gonna sacrifice a better experience for our constituents to have our staff be able to know how to use it. We should probably be thinking about either a different product for internal uses. So yeah, it's been what I was referencing, like this like ontology for experience for permitting. It's another example where, you know, like historically we would have done, and this is what a lot of other places you do user research, and you go and you interview a bunch of people and you try to figure out like what were they trying to do, and then, but it is a process that is like really easy to get wrong because like the number of people that you can interview and engage with, it's very easy to over design for the few people that you talk to. So we use data science and AI to try to look at our historic records of all the permits that people had pulled over the past 25 years to go and create that ontology, which then we grounded using user research. So like we're like, this is the data telling us like what these like high level, like a lot of people replaced their, and it's interesting because we ended up finding this like alignment with like our policy objectives around electrification and climate change. A lot of people changed their HVAC systems, their water heaters. It's like not big, sexy, interesting stuff, but like, oh, that's like right on path for electrification and things that we care about, and we're like, we don't tell people what to do with that. So then now we've been making investments in like our website, and then the new permitting system, our hope is that it is built around, like there's no such a thing like a permit to change your water heater. There's like a plumbing permit, there's an electrical permit, but we're like, we want you to be able to apply for a permit to replace your heater because that's the way that you think about it, and then we will just sort out what are the underlying actual regulated permits you have to get.
So I've read that you've used the term wicked decluttering. Can you say more about what does that mean, and walk us through an example? Yeah,
I'd say, look, it's tough, and I think that to some extent when I hear about big, complicated projects, I think about the Big Dig. Boston's, you know, a place where a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions. So I'd say, like, we've gone on UCI, and we're very excited to work with Caldera. I think it's not public yet, but we're going to work with them. It's like we're trying to figure out, like, when do we do a thing that other people around us don't do? When are we not required by the state to do it? That last mile change around change management is really hard because changing, if we say that we're going to do something, it's because someone cared enough to try to put it in the code. And if we try to change that, those people will surface and express agita. So, yeah, like the wicked decluttering is again like, let's start thinking about what is the experience that we want people to have. Let's go and try to understand what is it that we're actually required to do, and then like try to navigate these like tensions. Like it's a combination of regulation, habit, change management. I think like at the heart of it, like what we've been also trying to do is do a lot of culture change of like, we all benefit when people are able to do, like we fund the government through property taxes. If more people invest in their properties, it's a good thing. It means that we can pay for fire services, for recreation, for our salaries. Just like trying to get this like shared notion of like, our job is not just to say no or like cover, do a little CYA. When people are able to invest in building restaurants, but like that makes a more vibrant city, a city where more people want to be. And so it's like trying to get this like shared notion that like, it's okay if you say no because you think that the thing's unsafe, but like we should all be trying to align ourselves to try to get the outcomes. And then again, it's a combination of high-level regulatory alignment. How do we make sure that like there's less commission reviews, that the commission reviews align with this step of the process in which you're like at that level of certainty around what your project's gonna look like. And all the way from like really micro experiences to this like very macro experience, like building a big complicated building that has like a biomedical lab, all the way to you wanna change your toilet. That all of those things, and it's complicated, lots of meetings. That's wicked. It's wicked because it's wicked hard.
It certainly sounds so. I have more questions for you on the state capacity, city capacity side, but I want to talk about abundance. How many of us have read the Abundance book? Klein Thompson. Okay. So I think this could be for any of you, but Zach, I want to call on you first. What is your take on the abundance movement, and why is regulatory reform a key feature of that?
Yeah, so I am excited about the abundance movement. It's jives with the work that I've been doing, and the reason for me is that there are lots of important values out there. I personally care a lot about inequality and about the environment, in addition to broader issues of affordability and growth. And to my mind, in many areas of the economy, the best way forward to achieve that is through building more. So electricity is very expensive. You're actually standing in the States, in the continental U.S., that's the highest electricity. Like, how do we bring down the price of electricity? We need to build more transmission and build more generation. Housing is very expensive, and I suspect the states in which most of us in this room live. How do we bring that down? We need to build more housing. It can be very hard to get around on roads because they have lots of potholes. It takes longer to get to New York from New Haven than it did 100 years ago on the train. And so we need better trains. It would be transformative for the region if we had trains that were even half as good as the Chinese or continental European ones. So these all require building. These all require building more. And it requires taking a kind of a hard look at the barriers, and many of them are regulatory. So for housing, it's zoning codes and permitting. For transportation, like I said, it's permitting and procurement. For electrical generation, the issues are regulatory, though here, like, the valence actually shifts somewhat. I think many of us think that to build more energy, we actually need more regulation, need more national level regulation. But in any case, all of them are, I'm happy to talk more about that, all of them are regulatory levers that are broken. In some cases, too much regulation, some cases, too little regulation, and all these cases, the wrong kind of regulation. And they're legal issues, and they're also economic issues because they impact the economy, but also because you ideally want to have economic analysis to know what the precise levers are that we need to change in order to result in actual change on the ground without causing harms. And I think all of these jive with the things that I care about because, in terms of inequality, who's most impacted by high electricity prices and high housing prices? It's lower income people. How are we going to achieve the green transition? It'll have to be through building more renewables, unless there's some nuclear renaissance. It'll have to be through renewables. generation. It'll require transmission across long distances. It'll require electrification, including in transit. And all these things require building. And we'll need to have a new regulatory regime in order to enable that.
Christine or Santi, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I also have been abundance pilled. And, you know, there's a real optimism, I think, when I think about abundance, which is that it's really focused on cutting through a lot of the red tape that may have been well-intentioned at the time, but has led us to a place where we're no longer able to just accomplish the goals that we want. You know, government is responsible for solving society's greatest problems, but when most people think of government as just a roadblock or a barrier, you know that something needs to change. And I think on, regulatory reform, that is an area, and regulatory reform and just better laws, I think that this is an area where I think there's a lot of promise with AI, both in terms of the design phase as well as the implementation. So just to give you an example, in California, well, actually across the US, there's things called racial covenants in property deeds. So things that say, like, no one of Black or Oriental descent can live in this house, except as in the capacity as a servant. These are not enforceable, obviously, but in 2021, the governor of California passed a bill to say, assessor recorders offices, you need to proactively cut and redact these kind of unlawful covenants. So this is like a classic example of a well-intentioned bill that basically was a nightmare for government. Most of these assessor recorders didn't even have digitized records. So first they had to go through digitizing, historic records back to the 1900s, and then start looking for these needles in the haystack. And so, this is the type of thing where, like, AI can help unblock some of these, issues that we've created for ourselves with legislation. And so we, LA County actually spent $8 million over 7 years to pay a vendor to do this work. And our partners at Santa Clara County had actually spent multiple months reviewing property deeds. And they had reviewed 80,000, which seemed great, except that there were actually 15 million total. And so they estimated at that rate, it would take them 10 years to complete this project. And so with AI, we were able to come in and help them in 1 week and about $2,000 of inference find thousands of racial covenants dating back to the 1800s. And so I think that when we think about unblocking government, I think that there's both interesting things to do in terms of, like, how are we writing our laws? How are we reforming our systems? And also, how are we actually operationalizing the steps to actually implement the various rules we have in place?
So I would give, like, some personal take, not an official one. I'm a little bit skeptical on the argument of abundance that, like, that government regulation is the only thing that stands in the way of these outcomes. Like, to some extent, I think, like, there's market forces. Like, to some extent, like, yeah, we might make it slower to do some things, but, like, if there's a strong enough economic incentive, I think some of those things will end up happening. It's just, like, not that it is not there. I just, like, don't know to what extent this is, like, the only or the biggest explainable variable. I think that ultimately there's another piece that is broken, which is, like, trust and governance are broken. Because to some extent, like, you see it in government happening all the time. Like, we don't enforce things that are in writing. We enforce things that are not in writing. So it's like, the thing that is in writing is not the only thing that explains the behavior. But to some extent, it's like, people don't want to get screwed over, and we've created all these regulatory frameworks to try to prevent because we have screwed over people in the past. So, like, we go and we create some defensive mechanism. But I think that if we were able to change the way that some of the public process work, like, we engage people at the right time about the right things, and acknowledging the fact that there's, like, a big barrier around, like, information, like, like you saw it with Brexit, you see it in, like, things like stadiums for the public schools. There's a race for information to the public around, like, what is the nature of the project, who's it impacting, and, like, you see people making claims that have nothing to do with the project. because we're trying to get, like, very small groups of people are very motivated to try to, like, like there's this like agency problem where they're just trying to drive a narrative to try to get an outcome that is convenient to them. And like, we all suffer because so I think, like, if we can start changing the narrative to get around shared outcomes, start trying to build better governance. And that's what, like, a lot of our process, like a lot of our approach has been, like, as we start making it, because to some extent I think, like, government capacity is about building the intrinsic capacity of government to change. Because we might change our minds. The things that we might want to start building might be different things in the future. Like, we started to build something that we realize is noxious, this is bad. We want to build it differently. But if we deprive government from the ability of hiring people that are competent, if we deprive it from the funding to be able to do things for it to learn, I think you just get a government that barely is able to keep the lights on, to just do the processes that it is strictly supposed to do, and then it'll never change, and then we all just will be worse for it.
Okay. This is a panel on regulatory reform, and so I don't think we can leave today without talking about NEPA. So, Zach, what is the problem with NEPA, and how are people considering reform? How should we think about reforming it?
Yeah, so this is about the National Environmental Policy Act, which is the environmental review law that requires a process of environmental review for any major federally funded project. So the big dig certainly went through that. Any big thing that you see, it typically would have to. And this is the, if I were listing like bipartisan bills that could happen on Capitol Hill, this would be toward the top, because there are folks in both parties, legislators in both parties, who think that the process is not working quite right. It's too hard to build transit, too hard to build highways, too hard to build mining, too hard to build transmission, too hard to build electricity generation. And at a high level, the problem is that the statute passed in 1970 with very good intentions to protect the environment and to make sure that we stopped bulldozing low-income neighborhoods to build infrastructure, which is what we were doing in the 1960s. That two things have happened. Number one, there's been a kind of drift over time of what the law has meant. Courts have basically enforced it in ways that were not anticipated by those who passed it, to make it kind of very, very strict. They've allowed small numbers of people to come into court and hold up projects for long periods of time, including for kind of minor defects in the review that was done before the project started. And this was definitely not anticipated by those who passed it, number one. Number two, this has become more problematic over time because we suddenly need to build a lot more than we needed to before. We have a green transition that many of us think we need. We have AI that suddenly requires a lot more infrastructure. And so the way to growth, the way to be pro-environment has often shifted toward building rather than stopping building. So what these bills do is kind of twofold, and reflecting or at least what I and many people think should be done, and which is reflected in some of the bills, is reflected in what I described before and what our conversation has suggested. Part of it's regulatory reform, but part of it's building up capacity. So part of it is telling courts, kind of stay out of this more than you can. It's part of it saying, if there's a small defect in the environmental review that's done before this $10 billion project gets started, the project does not have to stop. It can go forward while that minor defect is remedied. So part of it's regulatory, but part of it is also in staffing up government. So the average environmental review, or the median environmental review, takes 4 years now. So that's not planning it. That's not putting out to bid. That's not building it. That's 4 years, often to write a extremely long document, which is largely aimed at litigation proofing. The horror story here is congestion pricing in New York City, which took 4 years. It took a 4,000-page environmental review for a project that, obviously will not substantially harm the environment. It's congestion pricing, which will reduce congestion, which will reduce driving. Nevertheless, it took 4 years in a 4,000-page environmental review. So part of it's defanging the opponents of projects that lead to these absurd environmental reviews, but part of it is giving government the capacity to do these things more quickly. I was very surprised by this kind of prong going into this. Kind of thought like, we're a rich country, we have a government that works at least okay. I wouldn't have thought it possible that like not having enough bodies to actually do environmental review could actually slow things down by many years. But that actually does appear to be the case. So having modest amounts more money, like tens of millions more dollars to speed up and save many, many billions of dollars seems like a good deal to have. Of course, AI will hopefully be helpful here as well going forward as we figure out how to implement it. But those two things together, reducing the rules, stopping small numbers of opponents from stopping large projects that benefit large numbers of people, and staffing up to be able to move forward are roughly what the reforms are proposing.
That's great. Well, I'm going to open it up for Q&A.
I'm particularly interested in what Zach was saying earlier about the government's regulatory approach and all. I'm a retired consulting engineer. I spent over 35 years designing and construction administrating infrastructure, a lot of electric, gas, water, sewer. And in Connecticut, if I look at Connecticut just locally, the regulatory body, for example, PURA, the commissioners are all political appointees through a patronage system. I, for many years, tried to advocate to change that. It falls on deaf ears because it's the way it's going to work. But you've got lay people making decisions with multi-billion-dollar, 100-year impacts, and unless you can put some qualification to that, example, underground natural gas, it was decided that was going to be the answer to the heating oil pollution. So we're going to build hundreds of miles of natural gas infrastructure. We should have been burying electric infrastructure at the same time. The state of Connecticut allows every utility to open roadways, massive, the excavation and the restoration is the money. Laying the utility in is a minor part of the price. So we repetitively repeat that process. The gas pipe goes in, we break everything open, we load it all into the rate base. Same thing, water, sewer, electric. In Boston, Santiago, the Big Dig. How much of the money of the Big Dig was unscrewing up the spider web of utilities that had evolved? So I question, how do we end up with competency in the decision-making for these regulatory issues of energy and utilities?
I totally agree. The system that we have in Connecticut, which is affected many other states as well, for regulating electricity generation, production, transmission, is crazy. It is. I think it's even worse than you describe, in my opinion. There are 3 different parties within Connecticut involved in regulating electricity. There's PURA, which sets rates. There's also a separate siting council, which decides where things can be placed. And there's also the Department of Environment and Environment and Energy, which also plays a regulatory role. Furthermore, these 3 parties cannot coordinate with each other. They are legally barred from doing so. There's a good reason for that, which is that they're viewed as the idea was that they'd be making independent decisions, kind of freed from politics. But this is absurd. Like, they're political appointees. They are at the discretion of the governor. Furthermore, many of them are literally unpaid. They are important jobs with zero pay. That makes it hard to attract good people, and often they get people who have literally no expertise in this really, really complex area of energy law. So what needs to be done? One, we need a coherent regulatory framework. You need something closer to one regulator, or at least regulators that can coordinate with each other. Number one. And number two, you need better people, you need more people. a lawyer that starts working for PURA, the energy regulator, makes $60,000. You cannot get many good energy lawyers for $60,000. These things are way understaffed, so they get totally railroaded by the utilities, which are well funded. So you need to have a coherent regulatory framework, and then you need competent, well-staffed, well-paid government to have the staffing to make competent decisions. And unfortunately, we have neither at the moment. And as you're pointing out, things go badly, and it's part of why we have the highest electricity prices in the continental U.S.
So what do we do if our governments don't want to work better? So, for example, I live in Tennessee, and our state government is hell-bent on basically reducing the efficiency of government to justify cutting social services and privatizing them. For example, our school voucher program costs about $1,000 more per student than it does to adequately fund our public schools, and yet the state government consistently allocates more funds towards the voucher program. And so if the goal, obviously, I would agree that innovation and regulatory reform to improve the efficiency of regulation and of government is a positive, but what do we do in environments where that's not taken as an inherent good or an inherent sort of value of those making the decisions about government regulation?
I could try. So I think with a lot of these things, there's kind of like a battle of ideas, right? There's some people that would like to depict all government officials as lazy, dumb, incompetent, and then there's, that's why we need less of it because it all sorted out. But to some extent, I think you go and you look at the outcomes, are those kids in the long run going to be well served? Is the economy of Tennessee really going to thrive with kids that are not getting the best education that you can? So it's I think that this is the piece that it's disheartening for people that have a technocratic background. I'm an engineer by training. You're this is clearly suboptimal, but that's a piece that having spent a lot of 15 years in government, it's we have to convince other people. In a democracy, you just have to convince them. You have to make good, convincing statements, try to use data, try to tell stories. Because ultimately, the good thing in a democracy is you can change everything. You could even change the Constitution if you get enough people convinced that we should. But I think that it's become hard, and I think that that's a piece that whether you believe in abundance or whatever, is that we have to convince one another and make great arguments and have people run for office, and it's the way that the system's supposed to change.
Thanks. This one's for Zachary. You mentioned a little bit about how the contractors for some of these infrastructure projects are often selected on the basis of who has just the lowest proposed bid or budget. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that RFP process and whether or not part of the problem is perhaps a degree of crony capitalism or politically connected firms receiving, contracts where they ought not to. Maybe just to hear your thoughts on that and how in the United States this might relate to other countries like in Europe.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a lot of the core of what's going on here. The reason for the laws is a fear of corruption. The idea is if you're taking the lowest cost bidder, you're not giving it to your friend down the road who's going to charge 50% more. So the motivation for the laws is good. And just it turns out to not work super well. I think many of us think it'd be great to have better empirical estimates, but it's plausible that we're saving, saving 10 cents in money goes to corruption, but spending $1 more on the ultimate outcome. And it is tough that if you give folks in government complete discretion, they might do totally corrupt things, but Europe does figure it out, including Italy, and I think we can too. The way to do that is not by the way that you, I think, both have lower costs and not have problems with corruption. is that, one, like you ban corruption, like you can't do self-dealing, but two, like you have a transparent process, and like we have the opposite of that now. It's very, very opaque what goes on. The governments do typically not put their data available, do not make their data available, and I think ultimately there's a deeper kind of insider dealing that makes it harder to change things, which is that, who benefits from the current system? It's the incumbent parties that are winning the bids now. Furthermore, like where are many of the government workers when they go make their private go double or triple their salaries? They're going to go work for the private sector. I think both the folks who are benefiting by winning contracts now and the folks inside of government who might then work for those contractors, like, do not want to disrupt the status quo. So, like, I think there is. I don't know if it's corrupt, but it's like it is. It's kind of like that, it takes some political will to disrupt that because some incumbent parties would be unhappy with the change.
I just add, like, it's also a risk transfer strategy. So, like, we're generally incentivized to do one big purchase and then have all this subcontracting occur from. Sometimes you're regulated to do that because you can't break a project into smaller projects, but one of the things that we've done in technology projects is we're going to be the general contractor. I'm going to pick the best of the people that are going to do each task. But it transfer risk to me. I have to do more contract management, more project management, more coordination. But because we're understaffed, it's hard to retain talent. Then you end up saying, I'd rather have Accenture or someone else do it for a lot of money. And then you pay a premium and everything. But we get to blame Accenture and then give them, not Accenture, I like it, but
We have one right here and then.
Thank you. I think this is a question for you, Christine, but I could be wrong. And it's about a different kind of use of the tools that you're applying. We have, particularly here in Connecticut, cycles of election that sometimes are as short as 2 years. Certainly at the municipal level, and a lot of very important decision makers, as you were pointing out with our commission, are elected randos who don't necessarily know anything about the commission that they're making, very consequential decisions. And especially today, the court of public opinion is a huge driver. And speaking as somebody who serves in my town, we're overwhelmed with naysayers and, outrage people. So I don't know if any of the way that you described the project, for example, in San Francisco, just sort of got me thinking, especially of the online arena. And have your tools ever been used in terms of information sharing, anything that can not just influence the public, but embolden the people who are actually making or changing regulation?
Yeah, this might actually be a question for Santi, actually, since you've done more kind of communication around your work. But so our tools specifically have not worked in kind of this, like the deliberative democracy or like that kind of space. But I've seen kind of examples of that. And, at the end of the day, it's like, at the end of the day, this is what every political problem reduces to, right? It's just like the people involved, the specific individuals, the political stakes. And that is a problem that has been around for, centuries, is not going away. I think where AI can potentially be useful is, well, first off, there's like a whole question of like, how do you do AI in a way that actually engages with communities, right? And takes into account community preferences and things like that. That's like a deep dive, right? That's like a separate thing. But, I think that in terms of making government more legible and the decisions that government's actually doing, like that is an opportunity for technology, right? So that people have a better sense of, what are the decisions that are even being made, right? Like right now, if you have like a town hall around a specific issue, it's like not easy to actually know that that's happening, or if there's something that's happening that's relevant to you. It's, if you want to find what happened, like dig into the website, go to the specific date and find that. It's like not searchable meeting information. And then the actual decisions that are being made, I think, like as Santi was mentioning earlier, there's a huge amount of risk aversion, right? Like even in our project in San Francisco, which, right, like here we've talked about it as a win, but to be perfectly honest, it's still under consideration. It still hasn't been passed. Despite many departments writing in with specific examples of, here are reports that we just spent X number of hours on and was downloaded 4 times, And like, that is part of this like culture of risk aversion and fear. And like, how do we actually go beyond that? Especially when like missteps can be penalized so heavily today. I think it's like very hard. Part of it is like culture changes. Part of it is creating environments, which I think philanthropy is trying to help do, where you can actually experiment in ways where failure is actually a good thing, right? Like that didn't work out. That's great. We learned something important for the next time we actually want to do something.
Yeah, I think it is easy for us as bureaucrats to stay with the procedures. Like, did I publish a public notice of this meeting? And it's gonna go in the obscurest section of a newspaper that no normal person's gonna read, versus like, what level are we proactively telling the story? And it is tough. I mean, it'd be kind of interesting to think about like to what extent, like if you regulated like things like social media, would you actually be able, because not a lot of people turn out to these public meetings. When they do, they've been like so motivated with like, so you're like, you already lost because you're like educating someone who's already angry. Like, they don't want to hear about what the project's about. So, but yeah, so we've look at data. We do a constituent survey and we try to look at like what are initiatives that we do and like how much do you care? Have you heard about it? Sometimes like there's like things that we put like a placebo answer. So it's like, if your program's below the placebo, like no one, it's like even the made up program does better. It's not good. But yeah, like, and we've like tried to do, like with council votes, we've started to use AI to create like a shorter, clear, plain language description of what the vote was about. It's like, but trying to always take it like as a unending goal of trying to get closer to where people are so that they can consume information in the way that makes sense to them, but it is tough.
I think we have time for one more.
Hi, my name's Eitan. Quick triangulation. I'm here, a student at SOM, spent a lot of time in the law school. And I had this really cool opportunity to work with the New Haven city plan on increasing affordable housing. We did a narrative research looking at various other cities that have successfully increased housing. Like, how did they speak about the problem? I think my question is, from a community organizing lens, do you have examples, either locally, Boston, nationally, internationally, where you saw key stakeholders, who were the key stakeholders that were stopping these reforms, and what language did you see that was helpful in pushing forward successful reforms?
So I won't use Boston. I was in my previous job actually responsible as almost like a deputy mayor, so it's responsible both for affordable housing, economic development, and a bunch of other things in South Bend. And we're starting to do some projects in this neighborhood that was right in transition. Like, it was historically one of the neighborhoods where there had been the most blight. So I had worked under former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, doing a lot of the blight remediation stuff, and then like under the new mayor, like trying to figure out like what was going to happen. So there was very strong resistance from people that I